All right, everybody head this way. Come over here. We got some stuff we want to talk about. We got Dave over here. Come over and meet Dave, too. All right. My name is Rob Roderick. I'm with the National Tile Contractors Association. I'm a trainer with the NTCA from Springfield, Missouri. Been in the industry for over 33 years. So glad to be here. We got a great program for you today.
My name is Chad Jones, also with the National Tile Contractors Association. I've been in the tile trade for about 25, 30 more close to years. Now I do all the regional training setups, and you'll see me all over the United States.
So here's what we got planned for you today, and actually all week. We're talking about exteriors. You know, they're different than an interior installation. And today in this program, we're going to be talking about be a prepper. Prepare your surface before you get started. So there's a lot of things to consider and think about. One of the biggest things is when we're working outside, we have to think about how hot it is. We have to think about the wind that might be blowing and how that's going to affect our materials. A lot of the materials that we use, they want to be in that 50 to 80 degree range, and we don't want that direct sunlight on them. We don't want wind blowing on them because that can have an adverse effect on those materials. So we have to always make sure that we have the right environment. So we may want to choose to do an installation like this earlier in the morning when we can get that temperature range, or maybe tin off an area to get some shade or break some wind, something like that. We always want to think about those kind of things. But another very important thing is, where are we doing this outside? Like if we were doing an exterior balcony or deck or something, we'd have to consider one very important thing. Is there occupied space underneath that area? Because if there is, it's a whole different animal. We have to make sure that we got great waterproofing. We have to make sure that that waterproofing is usually done by others. So we always teach from the Tile Council of North America handbook, and in it we have different methods that are recognized by the industry on how to do these installations. And in the sections preparation by other trades, that's where we see the waterproofing that's oftentimes done by a roofing contractor rather than the tile guy. So we want to make sure. Now this particular module that we're working on here, it's just a slab on grade installation. Good to see you guys. Glad you're here, man. The Arkansas boys are in. All right, so the first thing we want to check on every exterior installation is to make sure that we have slope on that installation. So we've got Chad over here. The slope that we have to have for an exterior installation is 1/4 of an inch per foot, no more than 1/2 of an inch. So we've got 4 foot here. We need to at least have an inch and no more than 2 inches. What do we got?
We have 1.5 inches, which is 3/8 per foot.
Perfect. So we're in between that 1/4 and 1/2 of an inch. Now that's slope. Of course, we don't want that water standing on our tile work, because what will happen is that it can work its way through, and then when it freezes, those water molecules get bigger and expand and start to destroy our tile work. So the other thing we need to check is flatness. And the way that we check it is with a 10-foot straight edge. You know, there's more sophisticated ways to do that the concrete guys often use with lasers and FF numbers and FL numbers, but our standards say we use a 10-foot straight edge. So it's a tool that all tile installers should have. You can see Chad's checking it here. And how much we got there, Chad?
We've got just short of 1/2 inch deviation.
So the two standards are for larger format tile. When we talk about larger format tile, that's any tile that has one side that's 15 inches or longer. And our standard for that is we can't have any more deviation than 1/8 of an inch and 10 foot. And for the smaller tiles, we can have a little bit more. We can have 1/4 of an inch and 10, but most every installation that you're going to run into is not going to meet that standard. And you're going to need to do some prep. And so what we've got Chad doing here is he's basically marking out the areas that are low, and we're going to use a product to float that out. Now when we pick our products, we got to be careful, because you know, we might have some really good success with products on the interiors, and then we move outside. Not all these products are appropriate for exterior, so it's something you want to check out with your manufacturer to make sure that it's going to work well outside. I'm going to check on our guy back here, Matt. He's kind of our all-star mixing guy. Man, he's right on time. Got you a present here. So again, we need at least 1/4 of an inch per foot slope. But we're not only concerned about slope, we also have to have flatness. We got that standard for those large format tiles of 1/8 of an inch and 10. We found out we had appropriate slope. Now Chad's gonna get the flatness criteria for us. Remember, we're always using that 10-foot straight edge. It's a really important part of a tile guy's arsenal to have that. And again, that standard is supposed to already be in place before we arrive as tile people. So if we look in this handbook and we see our method, it'll say preparation by other trades. And then it'll say that surface should be 1/4 of an inch by 10 or 1/8 of an inch by 10, depending upon the size of the tile. So one thing we encourage our members to do is always, have that conversation ahead of time. You can see he's got a straight edge here. He's going to pull that off. He's looking for his low spots.
I also keyed in the material beforehand, making sure that I get that great mechanical bond with the substrate.
Mm-hmm. And some materials, not this particular material, but some materials you would have to do what they call SSD, surface saturated dry. If you have a really porous surface and you put material on it, it'll want to suck the moisture out of that material. So what they want you to do is wet it down before you actually apply the material to the surface. We don't have to worry about that with this particular one, but some of them, that's a big deal and you want to be aware of that. So yeah, he went ahead and keyed in. He's doing his patching here. Do we have any questions? We've got it on stage right over here on the end. It's a cementitious patch material that's designed for exterior applications. So, good question. Anybody else have any questions? All right, quick review. We got good slope. We have some problems with flatness. We need to fix it. Some guys like to use thin set to fix those dips, but thin set's not designed to be used that way. Thin set's designed to be used in a uniform thickness across the floor. We don't want to use it to fix dips like this, and maybe some of you guys, we've all kind of done it in the past, right? So when you fill that in with thin set and you pull it off and you come back the next day, what has happened? You have a little dip in there, right? So it has a tendency to shrink. So if we have areas that are deeper in thin set, and you see sometimes guys building tile up as they're installing those tiles, let's say we have an area 4 times deeper in thin set than another area, it's going to shrink 4 times as much. It can actually pull tiles down. So you maybe have been in that situation where you've installed the floor and you've been backing out and putting more mortar under certain areas. You come back the next day and it's just not quite as good. Those areas that were deeper in thin set overnight, as they dried, they shrunk and it pulled that material down. So always want to use the right material to do a prep like this. Our options are cementitious patch or mud. Do we got any mud guys in here who do mud once in a while? That's a great way to make a really, really flat floor. And also, if it was a flat surface, we could use what used to be referred to as self-leveling underlayment, but now they're using the term flowable hydraulic cement underlayment.
It doesn't level itself.
That's why we got away from that self-leveling underlayment. So, but in this case, because we have to have that slope, it's an exterior, we got to have a 1/4 inch per foot slope. Every one of these exterior methods that we have that are recognized by the industry require that. We're not going to be able to use that flowable hydraulic cement underlayment. All right, so the next thing we're going to talk about is we actually have a crack here in our concrete, and this happens quite frequently. The promise that the concrete guy gives every customer is this material will get hard and it will crack. That's guaranteed. That's why they put all of these control joints in there. You'll see them cutting joints in there. They know it's going to crack, so they're creating a weak point in the concrete to kind of control where that crack happens. So whenever we go over this, according to our standards, what we basically have is 2 pieces of concrete moving independently of one another. If we tile directly over that, when we do it, we're going to have tile that break, and it's going to telegraph through the tile. So we need to treat this. So what it says, and there's a section in the back of this book, EJ 171, which is all about movement accommodation joints. It says we need to honor that joint in the concrete. We got a couple of ways to do that. One of them is if we have a really nice straight saw cut joint or something, or we can actually take it through the tile work and fill that area with sealant to allow those 2 pieces of concrete to move independently. Or we have a method for using crack isolation membrane in here. It's method F125. If the crack is small enough and we have the right material, we can use that crack isolation membrane and go over the crack and then install our tile over the crack isolation membrane. That's what we're going to do today. We actually have some right here. There's a couple of different ways that we can do this. I'm going to get out of your way. Some of them you can roll on and some of them you can trowel on. So we're going to do both techniques. So when it comes to crack isolation membranes, the things you want to think about is what kind of joint do I have? If you have a cold joint where two pieces of concrete have been poured next to each other, that's not necessarily a place you want to use a crack isolation membrane. That's a place where we want to honor the joint, bring it through the tile work itself. But if we have a saw cut joint, that would be a good place where we could use a crack isolation membrane. And when we look into that method, F125, you can see he's rolling this out. And another important thing is always check with your manufacturer. Some of them have guidelines for the nap that they want on the roller. Some of them will say 3/8 of an inch nap. Some of them will say 1/2 of an inch nap. This particular product, because of it does have some aggregate in it, it kind of sets the depth for you. Other ones, you have to be very careful to make sure that you're getting enough material on the surface to function as a crack isolation membrane. Many of them can be used as a waterproof membrane as well at different levels. And we have ANSI standards for that. NTCA 118.10 for the waterproofing and 0.12 for our crack isolation membrane. So he has rolled this out. Another way that we can install this material is with the trowel. And with other materials that don't have that aggregate where we can get that specific amount of material on the surface, this is a great way to do it, because when you trowel it out, you're putting a gauged amount of material out there. And what he's going to do is he's going to do all of his troweling in one direction. He's going to load up the flat side of his trowel, and then he's just going to fold those ridges down. He's not going to remove any material from the ridges. He's just going to fold them down. Now, another way we can check for wet film, or actually the thickness, is by using a wet film gauge. How many of you guys have seen this before? All right, quite a few, probably half of you. So if we look at this, this is a tool, and again, with this particular product, not so important because we got that aggregate that's keeping us at the right height. But with many of these, we want to make sure that we have the right amount of material in there, and this is the tool that we can use to do that. It has different numbers on it. If you look, we have 2 teeth at the end that are set at the exact same distance. And then we have different teeth that are set at different distances with numbers associated with them. So when we look on the back of a crack isolation membrane container or a waterproof membrane, it'll say, you need to have this many mil thickness for it to function as a waterproof or a crack isolation membrane. This is how we check. So for instance, let's say our manufacturer says you need 30 mil thickness. Well, I'd basically find 30 on here. I could stick it in this wet material, bring it back out, and I can see, did it touch this tooth that has 30 on it? And that way I can understand, well, it's going to work, it's going to function right. If not, I'm going to have to do something differently. With a roller, you guys have probably rolled on waterproof membrane in the past. You can have high ridges and low ridges and kind of differing amounts with the roller. But when you use that trowel, you're putting a gauged amount of material out there, and it seems to be more uniform and more effective way to actually get the material out there. You can see he's knocking those ridges over, kind of flattening stuff out. All right, do we have any questions? Are we going too fast for you? We got it, I think. All right, this is the biggest thing. This is what I want everyone to remember. If you forget everything else, remember this, okay? When you're working outside, it's a different environment. Think about the inside of your house. Probably the coldest it ever gets is 50 degrees, and the hottest it ever gets is 80 degrees. Think about outside on your patio. Think about the coldest day in the winter and the hottest day in the summer. Major, major difference between the two. Because of that, we got to make sure we're using the right materials. But here's another thing. Even if we do everything perfectly right, and one of the biggest parts of an installation on an exterior is making sure that we have those movement joints that I talked about in EJ171. But even if we do everything right, it's not going to perform like it does inside your house, okay? So here's what ANSI says about it. There's a whole section in maintenance. It says all installations, but especially exterior installations, require periodic inspection and maintenance. And it's the owner's responsibility to provide for that inspection and maintenance. And it goes on to say, including replacing sealant joints, replacing sealers, cracked grout, and broken tile. That is in the list of maintenance. So manage your customers' expectations. Let them know, hey, this is an exterior job. We've got a wider variety of temperatures. Think about all the water and the rain that's going to get on it. And if it requires maintenance, sell them a maintenance program. One thing that I did in the last few years of my business is I put in that excerpt from ANSI that says, all installations require maintenance, but especially exterior installations. And then I said, hey, this is not going to function like it does in your house. We need to come back next year, patch it up, come back continually, and I would sell them a maintenance program and say, hey, we need this many hours, this much material. Just manage your customers' expectations. If they expect it to perform like that bathroom that you did that never changes in temperature or sees very much moisture, it probably won't. It needs to be maintained. It's their responsibility. Let them know that. One of the analogies I used is if you buy a truck, you got to change the oil every once in a while, right? You got to change the tires. It's kind of the same way on this deal. Just make sure your customer knows that. That's the biggest thing for me with an exterior. Let's see here. What kind of questions you guys got? No questions.
If there are no questions, what I would say is that our booth is right over here, National Tile Contractors Association. It's booth 3938. If you have questions later on, come over. If you don't have questions later on, come over. So that's where we're at. If you don't know much about the National Tile Contractors Association, what we do is education and training. So I'm going to be in Florida for 2 months basically this time, going from regional training to regional training. And what that is what we call regional training is a full day intensive workshop about a specific subject. And a lot of times they're gauge porcelain tile panels. It could be substrate prep like this is. We have a thick bed method, which is a mud class for you that don't know thick bed method. So lots of things that we can do over there.
So question. Oh yeah, we got all kinds of stuff coming up. So all week we're talking about exteriors. We're going to talk about a pedestal system a little bit later today. I think, what time is that?
3:40 to 4:10.
Yeah. So let's review let's review what we've talked about, because I know some of you weren't here in the beginning. Whenever we have an exterior installation, all the industry recognized methods say that we have to have a slope. It says we have to have a slope of 1/4 of an inch per foot. So the first thing we did was we came out here. This is our on-grade concrete slab, and we checked it out, and we had an excellent slope. It was 3/8 of an inch. And then at that point, we need to check for flatness. The tool to check for flatness, according to our industry, is a 10-foot straight edge. We put our 10-foot straight edge on there. We found out we had an issue and we needed to fix it. So we found a product that would work, a cementitious patch, that would work to fill that dip that we had. One that was approved for exteriors. That's a big deal. I know guys fall in love with different mortars and patches and stuff like that. And they work great on interiors, but once you move outside, you really need to make sure that that product is appropriate to move outside. Once we found the product, we marked out our area. I don't know if you saw how Chad did that, but he basically just put a straight edge out, and everywhere he saw the straight edge was touching and that dip was, he marked it out. He put his material in between those marks, and then he took a straight edge and pulled that off, took the excess off. Over here we had a crack. Whenever we have a crack, we basically have those two pieces of concrete moving independently of one another. We don't want to tile directly over that. If we do, it's going to reflect and come right through the surface of our tile work. So we need to honor that according to our industry standards. And the way we honor it is either bring it right through the tile work itself or use that crack isolation membrane. Now, another big thing I didn't get into too much is because we have so much temperature range, when we move outside, we have to make sure that we have the appropriate movement accommodation joints, okay? And we need to have those in all tile work, interior or exterior. On an interior, we can go over 25 feet before we put in one of these sealant joints. And what I'm talking about here, and a lot of people don't understand this, is that tile itself, once you heat it up, it can get bigger, it can expand, okay? And we need to allow for that. And the way the things we need to think about is around the perimeter, we need to keep that perimeter open. And if we have larger areas or bodies of tile, we need to have movement joints in place places where we do not put grout in that joint, but actually put sealant. And we have a program all about that coming up, I think, tomorrow. So don't miss that one. So all week we're talking about exteriors. Now when we move outside, think about the temperature extremes we're talking about. Again, interiors 50 to 80. Think about the hottest day. I'm from Missouri, so that'd probably be 105. And the coldest day, you know, maybe 10 below, you know, so we're looking at 115 degree temperature change. So what our standards say about these movement accommodation joints is they say we need to have them more frequently, and they give us a range of 8 to 12. And the reason they give us that range of 8 to 12 is it's dependent on the width of the joint that we use. So if we use a wider joint, and when I'm talking about a movement accommodation joint, I'm talking about a joint that we do not grout in the tile work, that we fill with a sealant. And we're not talking caulking. When we use the word sealant, it's defined as an ASTM C920 sealant would be either 100% silicone, which all the manufacturers make to match the grout colors, or a urethane or a polysulfide, something stronger and will perform better outside than just maybe a latex caulking. So again, every 8 to 12 feet on the exteriors, we need to have those movement joints. The minimum is a 3/8 of an inch if we want them more frequently, and a 1/2 of an inch if we're gonna have them less frequently. But in addition to that, so it gets into quite a bit of detail. In addition to that, those are minimums, 3/8 and a 1/2. That's a pretty good sized joint, right? You know, your customer wants you to have a very small grout joint more than likely. So you're gonna need to kind of plan out these movement accommodation joints to make sure that you have that width to allow for that expansion and contraction that can come from the temperature change and also from the moisture. That's another way that tiles can expand when they're exposed to moisture, but a big part of that is making sure you're using the right material outside, porcelain tiles and different things that are suitable to be outside. Question. A great question.
What was the question?
You can use a prefabbed expansion joint for exteriors. I like this guy. Yeah, it's a very, very fast way to do it, and it makes it look really sharp and clean. So if you got a design consultant involved, you may want to ask their opinion and make sure you're locating them where they want them, because it's pretty significant change to the overall appearance of the installation. But great question. Yeah, those work terrific. So you can either build them or have prefabricated ones. Again, every 8 to 12 feet, depending upon the width of the joint. But in addition to that, and I was getting into some of the details, they say for every 15 degrees over 100 degrees, we need to add an additional 1/16 of an inch to that width. So you remember the minimum 3/8 and the minimum 1/2? Think about the hottest day in the summer. My place, 105. Think about the coldest day in the winter, 10 below. We're looking at a 15 degree temperature range that is above 100. So every 15 degrees above 100, now we have to add a 1/16 of an inch to that 3/8 and that 1/2 of an inch that we had for minimums, depending on the frequency of putting those movement accommodation joints. Yes? Okay, so the question was, what were you saying that the homeowner's responsibility is? So if you guys go into ANSI, there's a section that's called maintenance. It's at the very end of ANSI A108.02. And it says all installations, but especially exterior installations, require periodic inspection and maintenance. And it goes into some detail about including changing or reapplying sealers, replacing movement accommodation joints, cracked grout, broken tile, and then it goes on to say it is the owner's responsibility to provide for that maintenance. So how many of you guys have bought something at a store and somebody wanted to sell you a maintenance program with it? Has that ever happened to anybody? Well, I'm telling you, this is a good place to have that, but more importantly, to communicate that. Just from my own personal experience, I didn't understand that early on and did some exterior jobs and they just didn't perform as good. Not that I did anything wrong, it just wasn't maintained. I didn't know that it needed to be. And I kind of shied away from doing exterior installations because of that. So once I found that in ANSI and I started putting it in my proposals and my contracts, and I started explaining and controlling my customers' expectations, letting them know, hey, look, we need to plan on maintenance on this. It's really going to take some beating with the sun, the rain, everything that's going on. It's not going to perform like it does inside. It was great. It was a great addition to my business. I turned down lots of exterior jobs before that and could have made money, I think, doing that. So just control the customer's expectations, cut and paste that from ANSI into your contracts or your proposals. Also, in the TCA handbook, we have all these exterior methods, and in each one of them, it says the same thing under limitation. It says if you're in a freeze-thaw cycle, you should expect increased degradation over time. And when I say freeze-thaw cycle, I mean if you're in a climate, and 90% of us in the United States are there, if you're in a climate where water can come in during the daytime and then at night freeze, you're in a freeze-thaw cycle. So there's a whole map showing how many freeze-thaw cycles there is in different parts of the United States. Where I'm at, it's about 70 a year. So use your imagination with me. Imagine an exterior tile job with a tiny little microscopic crack between the grout and the tile. Water comes in there. Then it freezes. Like we talked about, when that water freezes, it expands. It opens up that little tiny micro crack a little bit bigger. The same thing happens 70 times in a row. Bigger, bigger, bigger. That's another really important thing about exteriors is we're required to have 95% mortar coverage underneath our tile because we don't want that water getting up underneath it, because once that expansion happens, it will literally break bond with the tile. So what you're doing when you're providing maintenance is that abuse that we're talking about with the freeze thaw, where it opens up every time we have a freeze thaw, you're just going back and you're closing that all up and tightening it up to prevent that water from coming in and doing that destruction. All right, that was a great question. Any other questions?
Last call. Go ahead.
Yes, exactly.
So, what was the question?
I think I understand it right. So in every one of these methods, there is a section that says preparations by other trades. And what that does is it separates the tile guy's responsibility from everyone else's responsibility. Every one of them in preparation by other trades, it says the surface should meet for the large format tile, which are tiles that are over 15 inches on one side, that standard of no more deviation, and when I say deviation, no more of a hump or a dip than 1/8 of an inch in a 10-foot radius. The smaller tiles, 1/4 of an inch in 10 foot. So it's separated there, okay? Now here's the thing. If it doesn't, and these places don't meet the standards, let's get realistic. The standards, like, we're not gonna find it. And the concrete industry says we can't meet your standard. We have a letter in our NTCA reference manual that says, look, if you're doing big commercial tile jobs, you need to plan for prep, because the tile guy's standards and our standards are not quite meeting, you know. But
probably what we should do is, if you can, we're at booth 3938, and come over for that question. We're probably have to wrap up.
Yeah,
on
we got to
time
get out of here. So, yeah, any questions? Any questions? Bring them over to 3938. Thank you guys for coming. We got a big week planned for you, and glad you were here. Thanks.
All right, thank you guys.
Yeah.